In today's video, I'm going to be showing you an amazing tool that lets you create your own customized chat GPTs and even launch them to your audience with just one click. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to be showing you a fully working proof of concept app that interacts with these custom GPTs so that you can create a customized overall end-to-end experience to your users. You definitely do not want to miss out on this part. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I talk about on this channel are going to be available to view and or clone from my Patreon page. And you can learn more about our amazing, rapidly growing Patreon community via the link in the description below the video. Now, before I show you the tool, it's really important to understand what ChatGPTs are and how do they work. So if you head over to platform.openai.com and you search for assistance, you're going to be redirected to this really nice documentation here. And this page here tells you exactly what are customized ChatGPTs and how do they work. They give you a really nice flow, a really cool diagram. But in order for you to better understand how customized ChatGPTs work and how you can customize your own ChatGPT instance, I created this handy diagram here. So if you think about your standard ChatGPT that everybody is using right now, I'm using, you're using, everybody's using for different purposes to get different answers, to solve various problems, we are essentially using the same GPT that everybody else has access to. And so this ChatGPT that we're all using, it has access to the same resources that every other instance does. They all have access to the same exact resources. But you can also take an instance of ChatGPT and customize it to your specific use case, namely by providing it with your own custom data, giving it your own custom functions, and even providing it the ability to execute code so that it can create specific apps that solve specific problems that you may be seeking an answer to. And as a result, once you customize ChatGPT to your own specific use case, this ChatGPT instance is going to consult the specific data you're going to be providing. It's also going to execute the specific function definitions that you're also going to be telling it to use. And it will also have code interpret functionality. And so if you take a look at this diagram right here, we have the user and we have a GPT assistant, which is a customized version of ChatGPT. And so when the user will be interacting with it, this specific ChatGPT is going to have access to specific data, whether this is, a specific PDF file or maybe your company reports or something else. This data here is only going to be available to your customized ChatGPT instance. Another person that's using ChatGPT for various tasks, their ChatGPT instance is not going to have access to this specific data. But because you've created your own customized version of ChatGPT, you've furnished it with specific data as well as specific functions. And as a result, you're going to have a very customized experience talking to this specific ChatGPT instance. Now, you can create this custom ChatGPT directly on OpenAI's website. So here I have a diagram of how this process works. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to create this assistant, essentially creating your own custom ChatGPT. Now, while you're creating this assistant, you're going to be feeding it with some initial data. So you're going to be attaching files. These could be PDFs. These could be Word docs. These could be other types of files. Maybe this is going to be some kind of a company financial data, or this could be just general PDFs that you want your customized ChatGPT instance to have access to. You're also going to be providing it with some custom functions. So if you are looking to create a custom ChatGPT that will need to access specific resources via these specific functions, you can also provide to it these specific functions that you may want this instance to access. Now, once you've created this assistant is now ready to have conversations with its users. And the way that you're going to be having conversations is by creating threads. Okay, so you're going to go ahead, create a thread. You're going to specify various things on the thread. Now, once you've created the thread, the next thing that you're going to be doing is you're going to be creating various messages on this thread. And these messages are exactly what they say. So you're going to send a message, hey, what's the capital of this country? The ChatGPT instance is going to reply. You're going to ask it another message. All of these are going to be messages here. Now, creating the actual messages is not enough. You actually need to tell the assistant that you now have various messages that you wanted to process. And this step is called running the assistant on a specific thread, because an assistant can potentially be dealing with multiple threads, right? You create that one assistant or that one custom ChatGPT, but you may have different threads of conversation, right? Essentially different conversational threads, depending on what you're asking or depending on a specific user that is engaging with your custom ChatGPT. And so in this final step here, you will need to run the assistant on a specific thread. And once you do that, the assistant is going to process, it's going to figure out what you're asking, it's going to get the right answer. And then what you need to do is you need to list the messages in order to see if the assistant has figured out what you asked it and whether it has the response. And if so, you may want to display the actual response to the end user. Now, as you can see, this process is relatively complex. There's lots of steps here and you need to get them right. And most importantly, you need to be polling for messages, because this step here is asynchronous. The assistant does not tell you that the messages are ready. You need to keep checking to see when the messages are ready to be displayed in order to display them to the user. And as a result, creating your own assistant programmatically is a very, very time-consuming task. Not to mention being also very error prone, because if you don't get something right here, you're going to be dealing with lots of issues. You're going to be spending lots of time debugging. And as a result, that's going to make the entire process a lot more painful than it needs to be. Well, fortunately, there's an amazing tool that lets you create these customized assistants in just one click. And the best part of it all is that you can also launch a fully functioning chatbot to your audience automatically. And what is this tool? Well, this tool is called BuildShip. And more specifically, these are going to be templates or flows that you can use automatically in your BuildShip instance. Now, if you're not yet familiar with BuildShip, BuildShip is an amazing tool that lets you create very, very powerful flows very, very quickly and easily. And so if you head over to buildship.com/assistant-API, you're going to be on this page right here. And here you can see that you can build AI assistants effortlessly, right? You can connect OpenAI Assistant API with any database, tools, and services, no code needed. Power up your apps and workflows with this AI sidekick. And if you scroll down, you're going to see that they give you some amazing templates that you can get started with. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing right now. And so let's say that we are interested in creating a website Q&A. Okay, so this is where you're going to be providing a website. And as a result, you can ask the assistant any question you want regarding that website. Okay, so we're going to click this thing right here. And we're going to be redirected on this page. And here's a little preview of how exactly this whole thing is going to work, right? So here you have a website on the left-hand side, and you can give this website to the assistant, and then you can ask it any kind of question about this website. So for instance, 31 best things to do in Barcelona. You can ask it what those 31 things are, give me the 5 best things, etc., etc. But instead of me talking about, let's go ahead and actually try this flow out. Now on this page, we have two options. We can remix this flow here, or we can chat to try. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and create this whole assistant. And then I want to show you how we're going to be interacting with this assistant. And one of the ways that you can interact with this assistant is by using this chat widget here. But first, let's go ahead and create this assistant in BuildShip. So we're going to click this remix here. And here we have been automatically redirected to my BuildShip dashboard. And we have also duplicated this template here that we need to slightly modify to make it work. Now, I already have a BuildShip account. So if you do not have a BuildShip account just yet, go ahead and create one. You'll probably be prompted to create your own free account. I'm using the free plan. They have a very, very generous free tier here that you can use to get started quickly and easily. And as a result, I have two workflows here. Now you can ignore this workflow here. That is for a different project. But the workflow that we're going to be working with right now is this website Q&A. And as you can see, I have this whole workflow here, right? And this workflow is made up of different nodes. Okay, so we have this node here, we have this node here, we have this interesting node here that I'm going to be talking about in just a minute. And this is the last node in the workflow whose job it is to send a response after the specific ChatGPT assistant finished processing our request. Now, this workflow is almost ready. There's still a couple of things that we need to do to make it work. The first thing that we need to do is we need to provide it with our OpenAI's API key. So if I click here, I already have this OpenAI key here, but all you need to do is click on Add Secret. You can add a secret key here. You can just call it whatever you want. And here is going to be your specific OpenAI API key. And you can simply head over to your OpenAI account and create a new key and paste it in here. Now I already have this key, so I can simply close all of that there. And I can simply select it here. So I'm going to select OpenAI here. The next thing that we need to do is we need to head over to OpenAI and create a new assistant and get the assistant ID. And so all you need to do is head over to platform.openai.com/assistants, click on create here and then give it a name. So I'm just going to say website chat and I'm going to click here to copy it. Okay, so at this point we have created a new assistant, is being displayed here. Now we need to get this assistant ID, copy it, come back into BuildShip, and you want to paste it in here. Okay, and that is all you need to do for right now. Next, we're going to click on ship to deploy this workflow. Okay, so now it says workflow has been successfully deployed. And so at this point, we have created our own assistant and we have given it instructions so that it can give us information about a specific website that we are going to be providing. And so let's test it out using a REST API client. Now, let's say I found a website about Barcelona that I want to feed into that assistant and ask various questions. So here's a website that I found, 20 plus Barcelona travel tips you must know before you first visit. So we're going to take this website and we're going to give it to our custom ChatGPT, our assistant, and ask it various questions about this specific website. So I'm going to go into my client here and I'm going to send in a message to this assistant. I'm going to say, what are the top 3 travel tips to Barcelona? Use this website. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this request and see what happens. Okay, so our request has been executed and this is the response we got. Based on the information obtained from the website, here are the top 3 travel tips for visiting Barcelona, etc., etc. And these are the tips from this website here, okay? Now, there are a couple of things happening here. We did get the response, but we also got something called thread ID. Now, if you recall a little bit early in the video, I mentioned how in order to communicate with these custom ChatGPTs or assistants, you need to create threads. And on each of the threads, you need to create messages. And that is exactly what happened here. So instead of us needing to do all of that from scratch, that whole workflow that we built in BuildShip essentially got the template, changed a couple of things. It is doing all the heavy lifting. We don't need to worry about that. And I find that really, really amazing because who wants to sit there and create all of these threads, add messages, and then, look for answers, right? We want all of that to happen automatically. We just want to be able to create these assistants and let our users use them, right? Let our users communicate with them. And so this thread here is something that we can mention next time we send a request so that the system knows that we are talking about that specific thread. We're still in that same conversation instead of creating a brand new unrelated conversation. So what I can do is I can take this whole thing here and I can use it in subsequent requests. Okay, so I can simply add it right here. And as a result, my subsequent requests will refer to a specific thread. And that way it's going to understand what we asked before and we'll be able to refer to previous requests and previous answers in order to answer our most recent query. And so, for instance, let's say I want to ask it another question, but this time I do not need to mention the website. I do not need to talk about anything that I talked about before, because all of that is stored in this thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, does the web page mention any cool beaches? Okay, let's go ahead and execute this request. And here's the answer. The web page mentions La Barceloneta Beach in the context of places not to visit. It states, number 21, don't visit this beach. Now let's jump back into the article and see if that is the case. Let me type Barceloneta, and there it is. Number 21, don't visit this beach. And that is exactly what this answer is telling us. So, we can continue asking other questions, something like, does it recommend visiting any beaches? Let's go ahead and execute this. Okay, and this is what it says. No, the website does not recommend visiting any specific beaches in Barcelona. In fact, it advises against visiting this beach, which is one of the most well-known beaches in the city. Okay, so that is the answer that we got. As you can see, it's very, very accurate because it reflects what the article was talking about perfectly. And we're also not mentioning the web page. We're not mentioning the specific URL anymore because we're simply mentioning this specific thread that was provided to us in the initial request. And so if we keep mentioning this thread, it's going to know exactly everything that we talked about. It's going to have the entire conversation's context at its disposal. Now, in the real world, you're not going to be interacting with your customized ChatGPT or your own assistant via this tool here. This tool is only for testing, but fortunately BuildShip gives you a lot of options when it comes to interacting with your own customized ChatGPT. And we're going to be covering all the ways that your users can interact with your customized ChatGPT or your assistant a little bit later in the video. But first, let's take a quick look and see what's happening here so that you can better understand where the magic happens. Okay, this first node is the webhook, right? The purpose of this node is to catch requests that are being sent to this URL. And so when you're sending requests to this URL here, this workflow will be triggered, and all the data that you're passing as part of that request, whether in the body or in the URL, is going to be recorded by this node here. Now, this second node is where a lot of the magic happens. This node here gets your assistant ID, gets the API key, gets the various instructions, the user prompt, the thread ID, everything, and it essentially runs this assistant that we've created on a specific thread that you've also created automatically as part of the first message. Now, in this part, this is where it gets interesting, right? Here is where you can describe your nodes to help AI to choose which ones to execute, okay? So what we have here is we have a special node called Get Website, okay? Now, if you click here, you can actually find this node, right? So if you type scrape, you can see that we have this node here called Scrape Web URL. And the purpose of this node is to take a URL of a web page or a website and to find various pieces of data on it. And so what we are doing here is we make this functionality, the fact that we can scrape websites, available to this whole workflow. And so as an example, let's say we have data stored in our Supabase. Well, I can search for Supabase here, and I can find the node that's called Get Row, and I can make this node available to our assistant, to our customized ChatGPT. I can say Get Row, and I can give it a little bit of a description here. And as a result, this node is going to be available to our customized ChatGPT. And so if ChatGPT decides that it needs to get data from a database, just like how it decided that we're going to be asking it questions based on the information located on the specific website, we can similarly have a scenario where we need the system to go and look up data that's stored in a specific database. And in this case, you might use this node here. But right now, this is not a node that we're going to be using, so we can simply delete it. And so once you add this node, you need to fill it in, right? You need to fill it in with a URL. and you need to fill it in with a selector. Now, remember the URL, we don't know the URL ahead of time. The URL is going to be provided by the user, right? The user is going to say, well, this is a website, this URL is the website, and this is the question that, I want answered. Okay, so this is the website, and this is what I want to know. And so as a result, if you click here, you can fill it in manually, but the best approach would be by clicking here and giving it some descriptive things. And here you can type input type and format, just give it some information and click done. And as a result, this URL is not going to be filled in by us right now. It's going to be filled in dynamically by ChatGPT when the user is having a conversation with our customized ChatGPT instance or our own assistant. And so this right here is where a lot of that magic comes from, right? This node here works with the assistant, but this is where it figures out what the URL is based on what the user gives it. Okay, so the user says, hey, this is the URL, this is the website that I want you to, take into account when I'm going to be asking various questions. So now I'm going to come in, I'm going to give it this website, and then I'm going to start asking questions. And ChatGPT knows that I want those questions answered based on the information provided on that website. Okay, and so as a result, you want this thing to be auto-filled. Now, the second one is a selector. Okay, this is a valid HTML selector. You can potentially also let the assistant autofill it itself, or you can just fill it in yourself. So in this case, it's body, and it makes sense because, with websites, they have a body tag. They have like a head tag, they have an HTML tag, HTML, head, and a body. And so body is essentially everything that's on the website, okay? Because unlike with this first argument, this argument we know ahead of time, because in 99.9% of the websites, they're going to have a body tag that will contain, the tags, the information that the user sees when they visit the website. So whereas with this URL, that is user provided, so it's dynamic. This is not dynamic, right? Potentially we can get OpenAI to kind of do its own magic here as well, but that is not needed, right? We can just say body. That's enough for like 99.9% of the websites out there. And so this OpenAI assistant node works in conjunction with these two nodes. These are not separate nodes. It's just this node needs to work with this stuff, right? Because if I didn't have this, it wouldn't know what to do with the website, right? It wouldn't be able to parse the stuff and actually give you the information. It needs to work in conjunction. And just like how I talked about before, depending on your specific use case, you can be using different nodes, right? So if you're not looking to scrape a website for its contents and, provide the specific information that the user is seeking, maybe you need to, look at different emails, right? So in this case, you're going to click here and you're going to type Gmail, right? And you're going to create a node called list messages, or maybe send email, right? If you're building some kind of an AI agent or something like that. So depending on what you need to do, you're going to be adding various nodes here. And whether these nodes are going to be executed and in which order, under which use case, is going to be decided by this OpenAI assistant, essentially by the ChatGPT that you're building here. And as a result, we can create our own custom ChatGPT that does essentially anything that we want and only what we want. Our custom ChatGPT instance is going to be working with our own data the way that we want it to work, to conform to our specific application use case. And last but not least, I promised that I would show you ways that your end users can interact with your customized ChatGPT instance. So one of the ways that you can do it is by using this chat widget. So if you click here, you are provided with a custom widget by BuildShip that can interact with your assistants that you've built using BuildShip. So here's a widget for this specific workflow here, okay? So this is what it's saying. Please share the website that you want to interact with, and then share your questions for the website. So what I can do is I can take this website that we talked about before. I can go back here and I can say, well, here's the website, and tell me any recommended beaches. And so here it's going to go ahead and visit this website using that specific node. It's going to scrape the data, and then it's going to figure out whether there's some information about various beaches that we should be visiting. And in this case, it says the article on the provided website recommends avoiding La Barceloneta Beach. It does not specify alternative beaches, but suggests to steer clear of La Barceloneta. We can ask it something else. What's the top number one tip to do in Barcelona? Okay, so here we have it. The top number one tip mentioned for visiting Barcelona is to familiarize yourself with a few basic facts about the city, okay? So this is one way that you can have your end users interacting with your custom ChatGPTs that you're going to be building with BuildShip. And this is a great way because you don't need to build out this widget. You can simply make it available that's connected to your own specific BuildShip workflow. This is one way. Another way that you can do it is by building a custom app. And that is exactly what I did here in Flutterflow. So here we are in Flutterflow, which is my favorite no-code builder. And I went ahead and I built a custom app that interacts with one of our assistants here. And so if we click here, you can see that we are interacting with this URL here. And if we go back to our BuildShip dashboard, you can see that this is this URL here. Okay, so I built this assistant here and I've gotten back this endpoint URL. And now let's go ahead and run our app and I can show you exactly how it works. And here's the app. So right now it says no messages. It tells us enter a new message and press send. And so it's going to be the same exact flow, just like with the REST API client or that chat widget on the website. So let's go ahead and find that website. We're going to copy this, paste it in here, and we're going to say website, and we're going to say recommend a good beach. Now it's executing that workflow. It's scraping the contents of that website to see if there's some information having to do with our question here. And here's the response. The content from the website specifically advises against visiting the La Barceloneta Beach, stating number 21, don't visit the La Barceloneta Beach. This response is exactly what was shown to us previously when we used the other interfaces. Okay, so we can ask it something else. What's the number one tip, doing in Barcelona? Something like this, hit send, and there it is. The number one tip from the website for visiting Barcelona is familiarize yourself with a few basic facts about the city, for example, etc., etc. And this was a very, very similar response as to what we got when we used the other interface, namely the website chat widget. Now I can continue chatting, asking it different questions, but most importantly, I want to show you how I build this app in case you guys want to build similar apps for your end users as well. So here I am back in Flutterflow, which I consider the best no-code builder right now. And remember, if you're a member of our amazing Patreon community, you're going to have direct access to this app, as well as many of the other apps that I've built on this channel. And that's going to make it a lot easier for you to get started and to learn exactly what happens here. But regardless, let me show you how this is done. Now, the first thing I want to show you is how I'm storing data. So if you go into data types, you can see I only have one data type called message type. And this message type has three fields. We have the role, we have the message, and we have the timestamp. So the role is going to be either me or the assistant. So I am the user or the assistant, which is the AI. The message is the message itself. Timestamp is when that message was sent. And now if we go into app state, we have messages here, which are essentially the list of these message types. Okay, and this is kind of the, the bloodline of the app, right? This is the main things. This is how the messages are stored. And so here I have a home page here, but inside of it, I have a list view. And if we scroll down on the list view's properties, you can see that I have an show empty list widget enabled here. So if we haven't started chatting with an assistant, we haven't created our own thread of conversation, you're going to be seeing this message. And if I click here, you're going to be seeing the other messages. Essentially, this is what's going to be displayed whenever we have an active conversation happening. Okay. So another important thing that I want to show you is we have a page state variable here called thread ID that is initially set to null, right? It's a nullable variable. That means it's initially null, because when we load the app and we haven't started like a conversation yet, we don't have a thread, right? The thread is going to come later. The thread is going to come after the first message, because just like how I showed you with this API, when you're sending an initial message without the thread ID, it's going to come back with a response, and it's going to give you a thread ID, because the first thing that it does is it creates its own thread, and that way you can reference this thread ID in subsequent messages. Now, this UI screen is pretty standard, and this is the screen, the flow that I use anytime I'm building chat apps, right? I have here I'm feeding this data with this app state, these items here. And here I'm just sorting them by the timestamp, okay? Because I want to show the oldest messages at the top and the newest messages towards the bottom, which is a very, very typical flow. And here I have a stack, and this allows me to create elements on top of each other, right? So that I can display them conditionally. So I have row other, which essentially displays messages if the role is assistant, and these messages are going to be left justified. I have row mine. These messages are going to be right justified if the role is user. These are my messages. That way I see my own messages on the right hand side and the assistant's messages on the left hand side, which is a typical, very, very normal kind of chat app behavior, at least from the apps that I use, such as iMessage, Telegram, etc., etc. And here all I'm doing is displaying the individual messages. You can also modify it to display the time that the message was sent as well. You have access to that information, so you can simply add it here. Now, if you scroll down, you have this enter message area here, as well as the button to send a message. Now, this is where a lot of the action happens. So if you select this button, I have lots and lots of things happening here. So the first thing that we're doing is we are saving the message that we are sending, okay? It's because we need to save all the messages that we send, and the messages that we get from the AI, because we're going to be displaying all the messages and they're going to be shown to us by reading this app state. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm updating app state by adding the message, the new message, the message that I just sent, the user just sent to our app state. Now, the next thing that I'm doing is I have a conditional action that checks whether a thread ID is set or non-empty, okay? And why is this important? Well, if you recall, the very, very first message, we don't know the thread ID, right? Because we don't have a thread to work with. So thread ID is not going to be set, but we are going to get a thread ID in the response. And then in subsequent messages, if we want to have that conversation with the same thread, right? Instead of creating multiple threads, we need to specify the thread ID. And so here what I'm doing is I'm checking, do we have a thread ID, right? Do we have a thread ID on the state as page state? Meaning that this is going to be at least a second message. It's not going to be the first message, because the first message, we don't know the thread ID. But for messages after the first message, so like second, third, fourth, etc., we are going to know the thread ID. So if we do know the thread ID, meaning this is not the first message, we are going to execute as a different backend API call, right? So we're going to execute this API call that accepts a thread ID. If not, we're going to execute a different API call that does not expect a thread ID, okay? Because if you execute an API call expecting a thread ID, but you specify like an empty thread ID, you're going to get an error from OpenAI, because OpenAI, it's going to see that we want to pass a thread ID, but the thread ID that we're passing is empty or null or invalid. It's going to give us an error, right? And that is why we need to have this distinction, right? So I created two API workflows. There are multiple ways of solving this problem, but this is the most straightforward way, by creating two different requests, depending on whether we want to include a thread ID or not. And that's what we are going to be executing. So here we execute this. We get a response, we update app state, we set the response message, it rebuilds the page, and we see the message in the UI. And the same exact thing happens here, except here, because we don't have a thread ID here, and this is executed for the very, very first message, we need to update page state as soon as we get that thread ID back from the very first response to us. Okay, we get this thread ID and we save it here. And after that, this will never be executed because at this point, this thread ID is going to be set. It's going to have a value. So this part here will only execute it once for that first request, for that first query, for that first message that we send. After that, only this is going to be executed, okay? And as a result, the user enters a message, presses send, it executes the BuildShip workflow, gets us back the response. The response is saved into app state, and this is automatically rebuilt. And as a result, you have this really familiar and user-friendly flow. Now, this website Q&A BuildShip workflow is just one of the many workflows that you can create with BuildShip that provide a unique experience to your users. So you can create things like an assistant with document retrieval. You can chat with your database. You can create an email assistant like Quizmaster, a chat with G Sheets, a city advisor. You can create all kinds of amazing assistants or custom ChatGPT instances that do something specific according to your own specs. And not only that, you can also make it available to your users either via that easy-to-use website chat widget that's provided by BuildShip or by creating an app just like how I did here with Flutterflow as well. It's really up to you depending on your specific use case. But regardless of what kind of an assistant that you create and how you make that whole experience available to your users, the magic here is really about mastering BuildShip and creating the assistants that provide the maximum value to your users. And if you want to learn more about BuildShip and create the best workflows that you can possibly create in record time, then you definitely need to consider becoming a member of our Patreon community, because on our Patreon community, we have some extra content that I create from time to time. And one of these contents is an extensive, comprehensive deep dive on mastering BuildShip that walks you step by step so that you can create the best workflows that you can possibly without wasting a lot of time. And that is exclusively available to our Patreon subscribers. And that's not all. When you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to get access to all the apps here, including this one, which means you can easily view and or clone it and make it available in your personal Flutterflow instance. And that means you can get started right away without wasting time setting it up and coding from scratch. And as part of being a member of our amazing Patreon community, you're going to get access to over 160 apps that I built on this channel in all kinds of different niches that do all kinds of different things. So regardless of what you're trying to do or what kind of issues that you're trying to solve, chances are you're going to find the perfect app that walks you step by step in solving the exact problem that you need to solve. And that's not all. When you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to get access to extra content, including these Patreon supported masterclass sessions where I do deep dives on various topics that the community wants to know more about, but also things like Q&As, behind the scenes content, and lots of other content that's exclusively available to our amazing Patreon members. And above all, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work. And so if you've gotten any value from any of my videos over the years, you're going to get a ton more value inside of our amazing Patreon community. And so if that sounds like something you might be interested in, then definitely check it out and consider becoming a member. And you can do just that via the link in the description below the video.